Okay, everyone, I'm very excited to complete this next interview with a close friend of mine. So if you could please introduce yourself and tell us what your career or job is.
Hi, I am Jess Sorbello, and I am a social worker. And I'm the program manager for the Elizabeth House, which is a women's residential program uh, for women with a substance abuse diagnosis.
Okay, so could you tell us what steps you needed to take to get to where you are now to be able to become a social worker and have this position?
So I got my undergrad degree in social work for my bachelor's, and then I went on for my master's in social work. And then following that, I was able to take my licensure exam so that I am licensed in the field. And then after so many hours, it's 3 to 6 years of clinical hours, I was able to get my clinical addition to that so that I can diagnose and then also be able to run a program.
Okay, yeah, because you haven't always had this job. You've worked in many other places to kind of lead you to where you are now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I've done a lot of work as a clinician in both outpatient and inpatient settings, primarily always working within the substance abuse field, but definitely worked my way up from intern to clinician to kind of second in command and now being able to run the program.
Yeah, I think that's good for students to hear and to know that, sometimes it is a bit of a journey to get to where you are. So, could you walk us through a typical day in your field of work as a program manager at a residential home?
I think the biggest piece to that is kind of I'm going to plan out my day. Every day I plan out my day and it never goes the way that it's supposed to. So I have 16 women at any given day that live here, and always need something. So even though I have other staff, it's often just me in the building, or they've kind of gone up the chain of command and need me for some answers. So it's a lot of being able to pivot and adjust. Certainly some crisis intervention skills, some clinical skills, but I do all of the screenings for any incoming admissions. So a lot of the day is spent kind of on my computer and on the phone, being able to screen incoming clients. We run groups here, and then I also try to kind of spread some of my time between being able to meet with the clients, which in a management role isn't always the priority because I do have clinicians here who always do that. But then I also do clinical supervision with my staff. So I have to also be able to assist them with any help working with clients, any kind of, pull-ups and corrections around what they're doing, any feedback that I have to offer, while also supporting trainings and things like that.
Okay. So, what do you love most about your job?
I love the ability to kind of just constantly adapt, honestly. Like, I really like working with clients. But then I also, within this role, appreciate that I'm able to work on some program development and the ability to kind of utilize research, take client feedback, and build a more successful program.
That's great. So you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering, if someone were to want to become a social worker or even a program manager, what are some of the skills that you feel you really needed to have to be able to do this job well? And that can be those soft skills or more trainable skills that you probably needed some experience for. But if you could just share kind of what characteristics or skills are needed, that would be great.
I think it kind of goes without saying the idea of that ability to communicate. Much of what I do, whether it's with clients or with staff, is that ability to clearly communicate both good and bad news. A lot of what I have to tell, clients and staff, is not necessarily what they want to hear. So being able to present that in a way that provides support, but also is clear and direct. And then also just the willingness to be able to learn. As a social worker, You're required to do, continuing education every year. So it's that idea of just because we've worked in some area for so long doesn't mean we don't have more to learn. So being able to ask questions, seek out advice, and then adapt, because what works for one client doesn't work with another, and what we might try doesn't work. So that ability to be flexible and kind of change our course as they need.
Yeah, I love that. I think that it's really good for kids to hear that just because you've landed a job doesn't mean that that's where the learning stops. Sometimes to really do that job well, you have to be willing to put in the work to stay up with the current best practice for a job like yours. So, understandably, there's probably some challenges in your job. What are some of those challenges?
It's really a combination. So because in the management role, it's the stresses of both clinical, but then also administration. So it's that constant pressure to make sure that, all of my beds are filled and that, financially we're making the right decisions, while also having to advocate for a client and recognize that even though our beds may not be full, the state of the house is better off staying a little empty for maybe a week or two if there's various things going on. And so that ability, kind of that communication piece again, to justify to administration why I have to make these decisions. So I think on that piece, like the financial component's really stressful, but then there's also, difficult clients and constantly having to navigate the kind of well-being of one individual versus the well-being of the house. And even though one client I think has a ton of potential and can do very well, when it starts to impact the other 15 residents, having to kind of step in and navigate and potentially have to choose kind of that one over the other, which can be really hard.
Yeah, I bet. Sounds like you're juggling a lot at once. So the ability to really multitask and do each thing well, because it sounds like everything matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what are your salary ranges for, and understandably, this could be a difficult question to answer because there is quite a range, I think. But what are the salary ranges for a job such as this? And are there opportunities for advancement in a job such as this?
So I'll kind of touch on a couple pieces. So like going into social work, because as much as I am the program manager, I feel like ultimately I'm still a social worker. So that salary can start anywhere, low 30s up to 60. In a management role, it's typically high 50s up to 70. And then there is opportunity for advancement to be more of like a director, kind of overseeing like managing managers as opposed to managing staff.
Okay, thank you. What is your job environment like?
It's comfortable, honestly. So because it's a residential program, it's a big, huge house. So it's homey, it's comfortable, and it doesn't feel like an institution. And like, it's the thing that actually made me choose to accept the position. Because it didn't feel like I was just walking into, a kind of typical like institutional setting. It's the girls live here, there's bedrooms, there's a kitchen, there's a dining room, there's couches, it's just comfortable.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked that question because I think that sometimes when people think about becoming a social worker or somebody becoming a therapist or a psychologist, you automatically think of an office, and that's kind of what you see in your head. But I want kids to learn and to hear that there are so many opportunities to be a social worker. And, some of them may not know that these residential facilities exist to help populations such as yours. So thank you. And the final question I'd like to ask, Jess and I went to high school together at Greenville. We took a lot of the same classes. We were in a lot of the same clubs. And I just am wondering if there were any classes that you took, whether it be in middle school or in high school, that you feel relate or connect to what you do now.
Sorry.
That's okay.
For me, I think the parts from school that really stuck with me the most was the volunteering opportunities. Like I distinctly remember jumping right in with going to the rescue mission and the nursing home and the VA hospital, and being able to spend that time with the counselor in Greenville that kind of oversaw all of that, and then also speaking with the guidance counselors that senior year when I didn't know what I wanted to do. I know English helped a lot, obviously, just with the writing and the communication, but also like our English teacher was incredibly supportive as well. And so, her being able to direct me to the guidance counselor to be able to have those conversations and kind of recognize in just talking to somebody else that there was an interest in being able to kind of sit in that other chair.
I love that. Thank you. Well, that concludes our interview with Jess Sorbello as a social worker and program manager. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.